restless. Baby, you're not that kind. Bam, bam, do-do-do-do-do. Don't go breaking my heart. You take the weight off of me. Huh? Oh yeah, David did these yesterday. I'm glad you reminded me because I need to show those to Nate and Darius.
Sorry, you got any charge in there?
Dr. Here, there's a picture of you. Is that right?
David.
And look at this. Look at this. Who's his English teacher? Optical illusion. Gross. Who taught him how to spell? Excuse me? What did you call me?
Did he say woman?
I think he did. Woo, disrespectful. Write this child up.
I called you a queen.
I don't believe that. You would never say
said,
you would never say such a nice thing about me. I just said it when I said that I said it. Oh, Troy.
What so start calling you in school to say queen or some day.
That'd be weird.
Hello, queen.
That'd be really weird. I wouldn't know how to take it. Oh, baby, when you knocked on my door, ooh, I gave you my key. Reading. It's a reading day. Tuesdays and Thursdays are reading days, primarily. I think I talked to y'all about stuff you're missing. DMV? For what? This is so weird. I just got an email that says Sterling has joined, but like he's already in this room. I just want to see. That's fair. I mean, it does come in handy other times when you need an ID, but yeah. Listen, I don't want to jinx it or anything, but it took me a long time to stop getting speeding tickets and getting in accidents. Like I was not a good driver. I'm still not a good driver, but like, especially in the beginning, I got like a lot of speeding tickets. Let me let these people in here. Hello. Let me get my, I'm trying to put it on this screen and it is not. When you knocked on my door, oh, I gave you my key. Here we go. Let's see. Oh shoot, I wish I had done this before. But On Darius. That's you. Yeah, it said Nate. And there's this picture of him as well. Really accurate on both counts. David Green drew those. All right, Ian's here. Corey, Christian. No, Brendan yet. Brendan's been out a lot lately. If he doesn't come today, I might email him and ask if he's dead. Hope he's not.
And he's going to respond yes.
From beyond the grave. How creepy. Yes. She will help out with that. I wish I had waited to put this up here because I just need to look at. I am gonna unplug. Oh well. Okay, so today's primarily a reading day. Yes, you can fill that up. But tomorrow, as you know, is Wednesday, so we have success sessions on Wednesday, and I think a few of you are going to be staying because you're missing stuff, and your missing stuff is contributing to low grades. I have, I think, 2 of you that never turned in the chapter 1 through 5 quiz, and that's an open note quiz. I'm a lot more lenient on due dates with quizzes just because like sometimes people are absent, but I still want them to take it. And then we don't have time for them taking class. So I'll let you know tomorrow, but if you didn't turn that in, you're gonna need to do that. If you didn't do the vocab quiz, which again, a few of you were not here, so I want you to do that. And then the thing from yesterday, about half of you turned it in. So, but I really like the responses that I got from those of you who did turn it in. It's really interesting to see what y'all think is gonna happen. Come on, man. There we go. It was really interesting. We did 3 questions basically. The first one was, what did you think the monster was going to ask of Victor? And some people said like a thing to make him happy, which like kind of vague, but maybe. Some people thought to create a second monster, which is an interesting idea for sure. Some people thought that he would ask for like a relationship with him, like to be the father that he should have been from the beginning, which is a good answer.
That is really unusual, having Mr. B just looking at you in the background. It's funnier when it's just his head and not like the whole screen.
Especially with that face.
Yeah.
It's a huge picture, if so. Although apparently Miss Cathan got like a print of a picture of the 2 of them and like ordered it so she could put it in a frame on her wall. And it was like a lot bigger than she realized. She basically has like a poster of him, which he would just hate, and I know it. He'd be like, why do you have to have my face all over everything? Have my freaking name tattooed on you?
I think he would think it was really funny that it was a poster and not like a picture, though.
He would think that that was funny. He would think it was weird she did it in the first place, but he would think it was funny. So a lot of you kind of agreed that the reason the monster probably killed William was like a show of strength more than anything. Yes, everybody's treating him differently. And Will don't know if it's in what we're going to read today, but what you read over the next couple of days anyway, you'll see like what other people he's even encountered in the time since he was created. But yeah, he was like, people don't treat me well. People, I'm like an outsider. I think it's really sad, actually. He said that like he can see that everybody else in the world has this version of happiness that he is not able to participate in. And that's really sad. One of the things I really like about this book is that it makes you question like how you feel about different characters. And you know, there's the whole sort of like not joke, but for a long time it's been speculated like Frankenstein is not the monster, he's the doctor, but maybe he is the monster after all. Like, who's the real monster in this story? And I think you can argue that Victor is more of a monster than the creature is. Huh? What? I never know. But the monster definitely has like a couple of sides to him, and hearing him talk about how like he's just been rejected, everyone finds him repulsive, it kind of makes you feel bad for him. He even says it like, I wasn't born a monster, I was born good, and then like everything that's happened to me has turned me into a monster. And I think that you know can be an argument there for like whether that's true and whether people can make you monstrous. But we're going to learn some more about him. So we heard him talk for the first time yesterday when I was reading the passage from chapter 10. But we're going to start getting today into his story and like what he's been doing this whole time. Let me find it. Do I have it open? No. So we're going to try to read chapter 11 today. Frankenstein. And I see that Brendan's trying to get in here. Oh yeah, like before we start reading, the last question on the thing yesterday was whether you guys think he's actually going to do whatever it was that the monster wants, which we won't really know until chapter 16, I think. But some people were like, yeah, he'll definitely cooperate because he'd be too scared not to. And some people were like, I don't think he's going to give the monster what he wants because he doesn't want anything else to do with the monster. He wants this whole episode to kind of be over. So we will see. Oh, and someone said we think that he'll have a really hard time deciding what to do because there's pros and cons to both. And I think that is a very astute assumption. I have this like new PDF, like a new version of Adobe or something, and it's freaking me out. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen here. And we will start reading chapter 11. Anybody want to read? I figured not. Okay, so just keep in mind when we're picking up at chapter 11, this is all from the monster's point of view. The next several chapters are all from the monster's point of view. So it's not Victor talking.
I can read if you want me to.
Yeah, if you want to read for a little bit, and then we can switch off.
Okay, so start right there.
Mm-hmm.
It is with considerable difficulty that I remember the original era of being. All the events of that period appear confused and indistinct. A strange multiplicity of sensations seized me, and I saw, felt, heard, and smelt at the same time. And it was indeed a long time before I learned to distinguish between the operations of my various senses. By degree, I remember a stronger light pressed upon my nerves, so that I was obliged to shut my eyes. Darkness then came over me and troubled me. But hardly had I felt this, when by opening my eyes, as I now suppose, the light poured in upon me again. I walked and, I believe, descended, but I presently found a great alteration in my senses. Before dark and opaque bodies had surrounded me, impervious to my touch or sight. But I've now found that I could wander on at liberty with no obstacles which I could either surmount or avoid. The light became more and more oppressive to me, and the heat we- wearying me as I walked. I sought a place where I could receive shade. This was the forest near Ingolstadt, and here I lay by the side of a brook, resting from my fatigue, until I felt tormented by hunger and thirst. This roused me from my nearly dormant state, and I ate some berries which I found hanging on the trees or lying on the ground. I slacked my thirst at the brook, and then lying down was overcome by sleep.
Okay, before we continue, Nate, are you saying you hate it because he says everything in like a complicated way? Oh, you can't hear him? Oh, okay. Yeah, there's a little bit of a weird echo. I thought you said I hate everything he's saying, which I'm like, fair. He says it in a really complicated way, but I kind of wanted to draw attention to that just because last we saw the monster, he didn't even he couldn't speak at all. He made a sound, and now he is more articulate than Victor. So we're gonna have to figure out how he came to know all this stuff and how he has the vocabulary that he does. He says, "I slaked my thirst." I think the only time I've ever even heard anyone use the word slake is in Pirates of the Caribbean, the first one, when they find out that they're actually undead skeleton people, and he says something about how nothing could slake his thirst. Barbosa said that. That's the only reason I think I even know that word. Well, let's have you finish the page, Eli, and then since the echo is weird, I'll take over.
It was dark when I awoke. I felt cold also and half frightened, as it were instinctively finding myself so desolate. Before I had quitted your apartment on a sensation of cold, I had covered myself with some clothes, but these were insufficient to secure me from the dews of night. I was a poor, helpless, miserable wretch. I knew and could distinguish nothing, but feeling pain invade me on all sides, I sat down and wept. Soon a gentle light stole over the heavens and gave me a sensation of pleasure. I started up and beheld a radiant form rise from above the trees. I gazed with a kind of wonder. It moved slowly, but it enlightened my path, and I again went out in search of berries. I was still cold when under one of the trees I found a huge cloak, with which I covered myself and sat down upon the ground. No distinct ideas occupied my mind. All was confused. I felt light and hunger and thirst and darkness.
All right, so I do kind of feel bad for him here because it is a lot like if a baby just was 8 feet tall and was able to walk, because he doesn't know anything, and at first he's like, I couldn't even see clearly, which babies can't see clearly at first either. It takes them a while to be able to figure out shapes and recognize faces and stuff, just because their eyes aren't developed and they aren't used to seeing stuff other than just light and dark. It's kind of like that for him at this point. He can't figure out what is going on in the world around him. And then he goes out and it's winter time. So he's just got this one cloak, and he's just wandering around trying to figure out what to eat, and just picking up berries off the ground, which I don't even know how he knew, let me put something in my mouth to get rid of this horrible feeling inside me. He doesn't know what hunger is, but he's just trying to figure it out. It's if a baby was just left to their own devices and had to figure out the world. So he's in a lot of pain, he's cold, he's hungry. Things just are not good for this monster so far. Okay.
Innumerable sounds rung in my ears, and on all sides various scents saluted me. The only object that I could distinguish was the bright moon, and I fixed my eyes on that with pleasure. Several changes of day and night passed, and the orb of night had greatly lessened. When I began to distinguish my sensations from each other, I gradually saw plainly the clear stream that supplied me with drink and the trees that shaded me with their foliage. I was delighted when I first discovered that a pleasant sound, which often saluted my ears, proceeded from the throats of the little winged animals who had often intercepted the light from my eyes. I began also to observe with greater accuracy the forms that surrounded me, and to perceive the boundaries of the radiant roof of light which canopied me. Sometimes I tried to imitate the pleasant songs of the birds, but was unable. Sometimes I wished to express my sensations in my own mode, but the uncouth and inarticulate sounds which broke from me frightened me into silence again. The moon had disappeared from the night, and again, with a lessened form, showed itself. While I still remained in the forest, my sensations had by this time become distinct, and my mind received every day additional ideas. My eyes became accustomed to the light and to perceive objects in their right forms. I distinguished the insect from the herb, and by degrees one herb from another. I found that the sparrow uttered none but harsh notes, whilst those of the blackbird and thrush were sweet and enticing. One day, when I was oppressed by cold, I found a fire which had been left by some wandering beggars, and was overcome with delight at the warmth I experienced from it. In my joy, I thrust my hand into the light embers, but quickly drew it out again with a cry of pain. How strange, I thought, that the same cause should produce some opposite effects. I examined the materials of the fire, and to my joy found it to be composed of wood. I quickly collected some branches, but they were wet and would not burn. I was pained at this, and sat still watching the operation of the fire. The wet wood which I had placed near the heat dried, and itself became inflamed. I reflected on this, and by touching the various branches, I discovered the cause, and busied myself in collecting a great quantity of wood that I might dry it, and have a plentiful supply of fire.
So it's pretty interesting, actually, that he's able to figure stuff out like that. And that's actually one of the things. There's not a lot from this book that is actually in like the old 1930s version of Frankenstein. But that's one, and I don't remember if it was actually in Frankenstein or maybe Bride of Frankenstein, but like throughout popular culture, Frankenstein is known to like have a fear of fire. And it kind of comes back to this. And you know, I think that it's a little bit skewed because he doesn't really have a fear of fire in the book. He's just trying to figure it out. And again, this is like kind of a childlike thing. You know, you gotta like make sure that kids don't touch stoves and stuff because they don't understand that hot is bad and can hurt them. Because from a distance, fire is lovely and warm, and you can cook things on it, and it's really comforting. But you know, if you stick your hand in the fire, that's bad news bears. So he's figuring that out, and then he's like, "Oh,
Too much of
well,
a
I
good
can
thing.
burn these." What was that, Chip?
I said too much of a good thing can be bad, with fire. Because
Yeah, absolutely. And he's like figuring it out and figuring out that you can burn wood, and like that builds the kind of fire that you want. Um, it's kind of a funny image to me, him like trying to imitate bird sounds. And it's just like, oh no, I can't make that sound, but like trying to kind of train his tongue to make pleasing sounds rather than just this like harsh, inarticulate thing, harsh notes. Um, but he's figured it out. All right, I'll pick up. When night came on and brought sleep with it, I was in the greatest fear lest my fire should be extinguished. I covered it carefully with dry wood and leaves and placed wet branches upon it, and then spreading my cloak, I lay on the ground and sunk into sleep. It was morning when I awoke, and my first care was to visit the fire. I uncovered it, and a gentle breeze quickly fanned it into a flame. I observed this also, and contrived a fan of branches, which roused the embers when they were nearly extinguished. When night came again, I found with pleasure that the fire gave light as well as heat, and that the discovery of this element was useful to me in my food, for I found some of the offals that the travelers had left had been roasted. Um, and I tasted much more savory than the berries I gathered from the trees. I tried, therefore, to dress my food in the same manner, placing it on the live embers. I found that the berries were spoiled by this operation, and the nuts and roots much improved. Yeah, I guess so. Like roasted nuts are nice, but like cooked berries aren't really a thing unless it's in a pie. I think. Let's see. Is that Brendan? I'm gonna mute you. Food, however, became scarce, and I often spent the whole day searching in vain for a few acorns to assuage the pangs of hunger. When I found this, I resolved to quit the place that I had hitherto inhabited, to seek for one where the few wants I experienced would be more easily satisfied. In this emigration, I exceedingly lamented the loss of the fire which I had obtained through accident, and knew not how to reproduce it. I gave several hours to the serious consideration of this difficulty, but I was obliged to relinquish all attempt to supply it, and wrapping myself up in my cloak, I struck across the wood toward the setting sun. I passed 3 days in these rambles and at length discovered the open country. A great fall of snow had taken place the night before, and the fields were of one uniform white. The appearance was disconsolate, and I found my feet chilled by the cold, damp substance that covered the ground. Snow. I guess snow would be kind of like jarring to somebody who'd never heard of it before. It was about 7 in the morning, and I longed to obtain food and shelter. At length I perceived a small hut on a rising ground, which had doubtless been built for the convenience of some shepherd. This was a new sight to me, and I examined the structure with great curiosity. Finding the door open, I entered. An old man sat in it near a fire over which he was preparing his breakfast. He turned on hearing a noise, and perceiving me, shrieked loudly, and quitting the hut, ran across fields with a speed of which his debilitated form hardly appeared capable. His appearance, different from any I had ever before seen, and his flight somewhat surprised me, but I was enchanted by the appearance of the hut. Here the snow and rain could not penetrate, the ground was dry, and it presented to me then as exquisite and divine a retreat as pandemonium appeared to the demons of hell after their sufferings in the lake of fire. I greedily devoured the remnants of the shepherd's breakfast, which consisted of bread, cheese, milk, and wine. The latter, however, I did not like. Then, overcome by fatigue, I lay down among some straw and fell asleep. So, if you're reading closely, we find out two things in that paragraph. One, he's met another person, and that person was so startled and upset by his appearance that he like ran off and left all of his stuff there. Like this is only the second person that the monster's ever met, and yet again it's someone who's just like, oh god, you're hideous, I have to leave. So his experience with people so far, not great. The other thing, and I don't know if this is distinctly from Paradise Lost, I think not, but when he's talking about as divine a retreat as pandemonium appeared to the demons of hell after their sufferings in the lake of fire, that's from something. Like, that's not just something he's picked up along the way. That's from a book. In fact, I don't know, I'll just look it up and see, because, like, where is he finding books? Panday. Oh, no, not panda. Pandemonium? It is Paradise Lost.
So I'm kind of confused. Is this all taking place before he kills the kid?
Yes, this is all taking place before he kills the kid.
Okay.
Like when he kills the kid, at that point, Victor doesn't really know like whatever became of him. He's kind of like, oh, maybe he died. Yes. And then he sees the monster for the first time, like right after the kid's been killed and Justine has been hanged for it. And then he meets the monster, and the monster's like, let me tell you the story of like everything that happened from when you created me to now. So that's what we're looking at. This is sort of like a flashback in a way, or like him telling the stuff that we didn't get to see before. It was noon when I awoke, and allured by the warmth of the sun, which shone brightly on the white ground, I determined to recommence my travels, and depositing the remains of the peasant's breakfast in a wallet I found, I proceeded across the fields for several hours, until at sunset I arrived at a village. How miraculous did this appear! The huts, the neater cottages, and stately houses engaged my admiration by turns. The vegetables in the gardens, the milk and cheese that I saw placed at the windows of some of the cottages allured my appetite. One of the best of these I entered, but I had hardly placed my foot within the door before the children shrieked and one of the women fainted. Yet again, like this is his third encounter with humans, and they're all just like screaming and running away or fainting. Much like that, yes. That's the noise that Troy would make if he came across the monster. The whole village was roused. Some fled, some attacked me until grievously bruised by stones and many other kinds of missile weapons, I escaped to the open country and fearfully took refuge in a low hovel, quite bare, and making a wretched appearance after the palaces I had beheld in the village. This hovel, however, joined a cottage of a neat and pleasant appearance. But after my late, dearly bought experience, I dared not enter it. My place of refuge was constructed of wood, but so low that I could with difficulty sit upright in it. No wood, however, was placed on the hearth which formed the floor, but it was dry, and although the wind entered it by innumerable chinks, I found it an agreeable asylum from the snow and rain. So he's just trying to like get out of the weather. And not only do these people like scream and faint, but they start attacking him and like throwing stones at him, like hurling projectiles at him and like really hurting him. And I mean, he doesn't even have the language to be able to communicate. Like, I mean you no harm. I'm just looking for some shelter. So he just goes and finds this sort of like maybe like a barn or something. Like he doesn't want to actually go in the cottage because he doesn't want to see anybody new. But there's like some sort of little shelter outside, and that's where he gets in out of the rain. And this will be important because he stays here for a little while. Here then I retreated and lay down, happy to have found a shelter, however miserable, from the inclemency of the season, and still more from the barbarity of man. As soon as morning dawned, I crept from my kennel that I might view the adjacent cottage and discover if I could remain in the habitation I had found. It was situated against the back of the cottage and surrounded on the sides, which were exposed by a pigsty and a clear pool of water. One part was open, and by that I had crept in. Now I covered every crevice by which I might be perceived with stones and wood, yet in such a manner that I might move them on occasion to pass out. All the light I enjoyed came through the sty, and that was sufficient for me. Having thus arranged my dwelling and carpeted it with clean straw, I retired, for I saw the figure of a man at a distance, and I remembered too well my treatment the night before to trust myself in his power. That makes sense. I would avoid people too if all they'd ever done was scream at me and throw stuff. I had first, however, provided for my sustenance for that day by a loaf of coarse bread, which I purloined, what a fun word, and a cup with which I could drink, more conveniently than from my hand, of the pure water which flowed by my retreat. There's like a little stream nearby. The floor was a little raised so that it was kept perfectly dry, and by its vicinity to the chimney of the cottage it was tolerably warm. Being thus provided, I resolved to reside in this hovel until something should occur which might alter my determination. So I'm just going to camp out here until something else happens that makes me feel like I need to move on. He feels like he's safe here. He can kind of hide himself. There's a stream nearby, so he can get water. He's figuring it all out. This is a safe place for a little while. It was indeed a paradise compared to the bleak forest, my former residence, the rain-dropping branches and dank earth. I ate my breakfast with pleasure and was about to remove a plank to procure myself a little water when I heard a step, and looking through a small chink, I beheld a young creature with a pail on her head passing before my hovel. The girl was young and of gentle demeanor, unlike what I have since found cottagers and farmhouse servants to be. Yet she was meanly dressed, a coarse blue petticoat and a linen jacket being her only garb. Meanly just being like she doesn't have a lot. Her fair hair was plaited but not adorned. She looked patient yet sad. I lost sight of her, and in about a quarter of an hour she returned bearing the pail, which was now partly filled with milk. As she walked along, seemingly inconvenienced by the burden, a young man met her, whose countenance expressed a deeper despondence. Uttering a few sounds with an air of melancholy, he took a pail from her head and bore it to the cottage himself. She followed, and they disappeared. Presently I saw the young man again with some tools in his hand cross the field behind the cottage, and the girl was also busied, sometimes in the house, sometimes in the yard. So he still doesn't understand what they're saying, but he can kind of detect like what sort of tone they have, which I guess is a thing that babies do as well. Also, like animals do that. And there's definitely some animalistic stuff about him, but like animals can detect, if you use like a happy voice to a dog, you can be like, oh sweet boy, you're such an idiot, and they won't know. Like they're just like, oh, it's a happy tone, my human loves me. But they'll also like they can pick up on it if you're sad. So it's kind of that same thing. Like he can detect the tone of what they're saying, and he knows that they seem sad, but he can't actually understand any of the language yet.
I've learned that dogs can actually get mad.
Did they what?
Dogs can get petty.
Petty.
Yeah.
Like how? What do you mean?
My dog is that
Yeah.
like once she like did not get mad at us, she's we'll go into our garden, you know.
That's true. They do stuff like that. My sister's old dog was mad at her for some reason, and he went and like drank a lot of water and then just like went to her bed and threw up all the water on her bed. like he intended to do it. He's like, that's what you get. They can be petty. Hang on, I just want to skip forward a little bit. Okay, I just wanted to see if we were closing in on it. On examining my dwelling, I found that one of the windows of the cottage had formerly occupied a part of it, but the panes had been filled up with wood. In one of these was a small and almost imperceptible chink through which the eye could just penetrate. Through this crevice, a small room was visible, whitewashed and clean, but very bare of furniture. In one corner, near a small fire, stood an old man, leaning his head upon his hands in a disconsolate attitude. Disconsolate meaning like cannot be consoled, like very upset. The young girl was occupied in arranging the cottage, but presently she took something out of a drawer, which employed her hands, and she sat down beside the old man, who, taking up the instrument, began to play and produce sounds sweeter than the voice of the thrush or the nightingale. He's got some kind of musical instrument. It was a lovely sight, even to me, poor wretch, who had never beheld aught beautiful before. Nothing that beautiful. The silver hair and benevolent countenance of the aged cottager won my reverence, while the gentle manners of the girl enticed my love. He played a sweet, mournful air, which I perceived drew tears from the eyes of his amiable companion, of which the old man took no notice until she sobbed audibly. He then pronounced a few sounds, and the fair creature, leaving her work, knelt at his feet. He raised her and smiled with such kindness and affection that I felt sensations of a peculiar and overpowering nature. They were a mixture of pain and pleasure such as I had never before experienced, either from hunger or cold, warmth or food, and I withdrew from the window, unable to bear these emotions. That's a lot. That's a lot to deal with when you're like a person who doesn't know how to handle anything. Like he's worried about feeding himself and sheltering himself. This is the first time, other than like being upset about people being repulsed by him, he's like feeling real emotions here. And he might not be able to exactly understand what's going on between this family, but he knows they're very sad. And just the way that they are together, like the love that he sees between them, he's like, oh, I want that. And they kind of win over his affection just from like the way that he sees them interact. Like he thinks it's so sweet and so sad that he feels like he wishes he was a part of it, which like that's just family, you know. But like he leaves, he's like, I can't stand to see this anymore. Having too many feelings, which like relatable. Soon after this, the young man returned, bearing on his shoulders a load of wood. The girl met him at the door, helped to relieve him of his burden, and taking some of the fuel into the cottage, placed it on the fire. Then she and the youth went apart into a nook of the cottage, and he showed her a large loaf and a piece of cheese. Delicious. She seemed pleased and went into the garden for some roots and plants, which she placed in water and then upon the fire. She afterwards continued her work, whilst the young man went into the garden and appeared busily employed in digging and pulling up roots. After he had been employed thus about an hour, the young woman joined him, and they entered the cottage together. The old man had in the meantime been pensive, but on the appearance of his companions he assumed a more cheerful air, and they sat down to eat. The meal was quickly dispatched. The young woman was again occupied in arranging the cottage. The old man walked before the cottage in the sun for a few minutes, leaning on the arm of the youth. Nothing could exceed in beauty the contrast between these two excellent creatures. One was old, with silver hairs and a countenance beaming with benevolence and love. The younger was slight and graceful in his figure, and his features were molded with the finest symmetry. Yet his eyes and attitude expressed the utmost sadness and despondency. The old man returned to the cottage, and the youth, with tools different from those he had used in the morning, directed his steps across the fields. Night quickly shut in, but to my extreme wonder, I found that the cottagers had a means of prolonging light by the use of tapers. Candles, by the way, that's what that is. I was delighted to find the setting of the sun did not put an end to the pleasure I experienced in watching my human neighbors. In the evening, the young girl and her companion were employed in various occupations which I did not understand, and the old man again took up the instrument which produced the divine sounds that had enchanted me in the morning. So as soon as he had finished, the youth began, not to play, but to utter sounds that were monotonous and neither resembling the harmony of the old man's instruments nor the songs of the birds. I since found that he read aloud, but at that time I knew nothing of the science of words or letters. The family, after having thus been thus occupied for a short time, extinguished their lights and retired, as I conjectured, to rest. Okay, so he's kind of watching this family, and spoiler alert, he's going to keep watching them for a little while. He just finds them fascinating, and this chapter is interesting to me because it's almost like a nature documentary, but where people are the subject. They're like, look at the human in his natural habitat. See the way that he extends the light by lighting a candle. Like, it's just really interesting the way that he is noticing all these things, and like he doesn't understand them all. He's not used to any of that stuff. But like he's starting to pick up on stuff. He's starting to pick up on what relationships look like. He doesn't realize at this point that the guy's reading aloud, but he figures that out at some point. Music, he's experiencing music for the first time. It's kind of cool to watch him like perceive the world for the first time. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes left, but I don't think I'm gonna keep reading. The goal was to get through one chapter. But before Thursday, I want you guys to read chapters 12 and 13. And again, you can use Spark Notes to help you with this stuff. I kind of feel like his stuff, like the monsters dialogue, is more articulate, or like the language is like more elevated, but it's easier to understand than Victor's. I don't know why, but like, I don't know, it's really interesting. Sometimes he does say stuff like thy and thou, and that's kind of weird and antiquated, but I feel like it's easier to understand. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and let you guys go. And tomorrow, if you're not staying, which we'll sign in tomorrow, and I'll message everybody who needs to stay and like what they need to work on. But you'll have time to work on reading these as well. So I will see you guys tomorrow.